chat, your name, where you're dialing in from, your LinkedIn URL. Introduce yourselves and talk amongst yourselves. Okay, we have a bit of a packed schedule, so we're going to start on time here. So welcome to In Climate Carbon Accounting, which is part of the Climate Career Week series. My name is Valerie Vidala. I'm a volunteer from Work on Climate, which is one of the event sponsors. I'm also joined by Denise Devlin from 1PointFive and Nicolette Berkey, also from Work on Climate, who are helping to monitor the chat and support on the tech side. So again, welcome to In Climate Carbon Accounting. I'm delighted to welcome our panelists and moderator for today. Magdalene Blazimski is an Associate Greenhouse Gas Emissions Officer at the Joint FAO and IAEA Center. Christina Barrera is Sustainability Consultant at Qantas, focused on GHG and LCA projects. Sarah Shoemaker is Program Manager at the Change Climate Project, and Neil Yeo is founder and CEO of 1PointFive. Our format today is going to be a 10-minute presentation led by Neil, followed by a 25-minute discussion, and we'll leave 15 minutes for audience Q&A at the end before we close. The session is being live streamed and will be recorded, and a link will be available. Before the session starts, I'd like to quickly tell you a little bit about Work on Climate. Because if you're attending any Work on Climate career sessions this week and you don't know about Work on Climate, you probably should. With over 28,000 members and growing, Work on Climate is a nonprofit organization, and it's the largest, most active community addressing talent shortages and climate. We're on a mission to transform the talent ecosystem and build the workforce humanity needs to solve climate change equitably and justly. Also, if you do join Work on Climate or you are a member, you should check out the Learn Finance channel, which is very relevant to the session today because it's focused on building climate skills in finance adjacent roles, such as carbon accounting, ESG reporting, project finance, et cetera. Now, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Neil Yeo, CEO and founder of 1PointFive, which is a sustainability advisory and technology firm. Take it away, Neil.
All right. Thank you so much, Valerie. I'm really excited. We've got a jam-packed thing. Would plug that if you want to dive deeper, definitely join the Learn Finance sub-community. This is part of a bi-monthly series. So 1PointFive has a partnership with Work on Climate as sustainability professionals, and we have a community network, including the people on the panel who have had some connection with us at some way through either working with us or working within our academy. We will host these bi-monthly, and it's a really great way for you to get upskilled, but also to make the industry connections. And today we're doing a bit of both. So as you mentioned, I am the guest speaker today. I have really exciting ways to sort of dive deep, so we should just go straight into it. So for context setting, why do we even care about carbon accounting? Well, we know in the last few years, there has been a hockey stick growth in what we call science-based targets. It's when an organization applies for a net zero strategy. And when they submit these to either standards providers or to the government, they need to do carbon accounting. There's no way that you can set or reduce emissions without measuring it. And it's blown up across the globe. Not only at a global level is net zero, and by the way, we'll share these slides too, so don't feel like you need to take vigorous notes, but net zero has blown up at a global scale, right? We know from a country level side, it is something that is leading and is needed for us to decarbonize into the future. But some countries are mandating it, but a lot of countries are still voluntary. And I think Europe and North America are probably the biggest in terms of mandating policies, but other countries will still need to follow suit because, as you'll see soon, Scope 3 emissions, which are the supply chain emissions, are most likely Scope 1 emissions for companies and organizations even in the global south. But why do you care? Well, sustainability manager jobs have outstripped even clean energy jobs in the last 5 years. It is the number one hire that they're hiring, not only for sustainability managers, but associates at all levels. But there's a problem. We have 2 times the number of job postings that require green skill, but half of the talent that we have, right? And we know that if you're able to get a green skill, like today, hopefully, you'll be able to be more resilient in your hiring and have more success in getting hired. And why does it matter? Well, there was a research study that showed that to be a successful sustainability professional, to help a company go net zero, you need a mix of not only quantitative skill sets, but qualitative. If you look at it, data collection and management is right at the top, which is carbon accounting effectively. Or actually, sorry, carbon accounting is right there. So it's a combination of the two, but you also need broad stakeholder management, right? So it's not just the qualitative, it's also the quantitative. You'll be meeting some of the folk who have to do both, most likely, because you need to translate the measurement into what the business does. And as sustainability professionals, we actually do a hell of a lot of work within this space, right? I would sort of say the top two work is modeling and communicating. And a lot of the times, even this information is then rolled up into a company's net zero strategy, which is part of their ambition. And then the work of implementing is more than likely in the supply chain of reducing emissions from the supply chain, which is where Scope 3 are. Well, to gauge people's fluency, please be completely honest using the Slido, either the QR code if you have your phone, or you can go to slido.com and add the hashtag. Would love to know what the familiarity is for the group so that even our speakers can understand of how familiar you are with GHG or carbon accounting. 1 is that you have no knowledge, and 10, I should get you to teach this course instead. All right. Got it. And GHG is greenhouse gas emissions. Right, so we'll give a little bit of time for this to come through, but we're getting a real mix. I think there's some people who don't have any knowledge at all, some that have a decent amount, but kind of probably within the mid-tier. So we'll kind of gauge that, you know, we're kind of at the starting point, but also some people know enough to get dangerous. So let's move forward. So as a quick overview, what is carbon accounting or GHG accounting? The easiest way that I describe this is comparing it with financial accounting. So just as financial accounting measures an organization's financial health, GHG accounting quantifies the impact of an organization's business on the climate, right? There are similarities with it, but the one caveat is that GHG accounting is as mature as financial accounting was in the 1930s. So take that with a grain of salt, and probably more than likely why we have creative accounting, for better or for worse, because the standards are getting developed as organizations are trying to meet net zero within 6 years. So that's a caveat that's been the biggest trick for GHG accounting to stay on top of stuff. So it's really hard to stay an expert, to be honest. You basically need to re-research things every few months when new standards come out. And it's the bane of our existence, but it's just what we have to do. And we know that unless you can measure things, you can't actually reduce things. So if someone tells me to just recycle more one more time without telling me, well, what does that actually mean in terms of emissions? We're not really getting anywhere. And why focus on enterprise? Well, organizations have an outstripped impact compared to our individual actions. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't act individually, but organizations need to be part of it. So who governs GHG accounting? Well, just like CPA and CFA, there's all these standards. We have been mainly following the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and they have released protocol standards since 2004 all the way to 2025, which we're expected to have updates to the GHG protocol. So pretty much most organizations, if not all organizations, use the GHG protocol. And a lot of what I have to share can be read if you're willing to read the 200 pages of the standards and guidance. But the thing is that we have this guidance here. It is a nonprofit. It does a lot of work. It was co-founded by WBCSD and WRI. But you know, we're well overdue for updates, and it does take time to get a grapple and a sense of it. And this is what the version of the diagram was in 2011. This is the scope 1, 2, 3. This is how you build a GHG accounting statement. You need to have these 3 things. A lot of the times, some people may only have scope 1 and 2, and it really depends on the jurisdiction you're in, the size of your company, whether you're public or private, and all those things. So easy way to describe it is scope 1 is the company facilities that you own and the company vehicles that you own. So it's basically ownership, right? That's easy. Scope 2 is your purchase electricity, steam, and heat and cooling. So it comes to a lot from your utility bills, your fugitive emissions, like if you have air conditioning units and things like that. But it's mainly the fact that you operate or lease these things. Or operational control is the key thing. But as you can see, scope 3 is massive. And it's basically a fancy way to say the value chain emissions. It's everything from your upstream to downstream activities. There's 15 categories, of which some companies will choose to measure some parts of it, depending on what's material for their industry or what they're mandated to do. And scope 3 is where the majority of emissions lie. But I know people are saying, well, wouldn't you be double counting with scope 3? Well, that's where the accounting standards come and help to guide. But this is effectively what makes up a GHG accounting statement. The thing is, though, it's harder to calculate when the further you go into scope. So scope 1 and 2 is easy, right? You can, well, easier. You still need to map data, but scope 3 is harder, right? You have to talk to your vendors. You have to figure out what your consumers are buying, right? And as you go further into the scopes, your ability to control those emissions will be harder and harder, right? Then you're really responsible for suppliers and customer behaviors in order to reduce your scope 3 emissions. But it is important because that's what makes up an inventory. So here's an example of what it physically looks like. Microsoft has their scope 1, 2, 3 inventory. Hopefully this doesn't freak out people who are financial accountants, but it's very similar, right? You have a financial operating year, whether it's an annual year or fiscal year. You have your emissions by scope and category. And then ideally, you're reducing those emissions over time. You're identifying where your emission hotspots are and you're reducing it. So what's an example? Well, I would sort of say that an oil and gas firm, their biggest emissions are more than likely on the use of sold products, category 11. Why? Because burning fossil fuels is where the biggest emissions lie. And so therefore, more than likely, an oil and gas firm will have an outsized category 11 scope 3 emissions that they will focus on to reduce ideally. What is the problem? Well, BP's net zero strategy, BP's net zero goal does not include use of products sold. And here inherently is the problem. GHG protocol is still voluntary. It's starting to get mandated, but companies can really omit certain scope 3 elements if they want to. But that soon will change, and that's what we're excited by. And so this is what it ends up looking like. If you look up any of your sustainability reports, I highly encourage you to do that. If you want to dive deeper, Control F GHG protocol, take a look at the scope 1, 2, 3 and see where the emissions lie for your company. And more than likely, publicly traded companies generally should have something out there. But you're saying, okay, well, how do I even get this skill set? And you're right. The majority of corporate sustainability roles right now require familiarity with a bunch of these things: GHG accounting, LCA modeling, carbon calculation, key frameworks. Well, where do you get this from if you're not already working in industry? You're absolutely right. This is a significant problem. And so organizations generally hire from the same pool. University, academia, its university courses are too academic. I myself did a master's of environmental management and probably learned 10% of what I actually use in industry. And online content is just way too broad and overwhelming. And so many of you get left out of the market. And this is why we're here. And so what we ended up building was the Academy. We built a micro-credential over 6 weeks so that people can get access to all the skill sets that they need. And this is just a piece of what we do. We even have Magdalene on the panel who used to do this, and Christina who used to work for us, and Sarah who provides the platform that we do GHG accounting training on, which is the Change Climate Project, or the B tool that they have, which is a nonprofit doing amazing work. And then the last year, we've trained over 500 people across 40 countries, and they have increased their confidence. So what does this mean for you? If you're not in this program, how can you approach getting a job in this field? Well, I think it's pretty interesting to look at these 4 categories. Generally, 1, industry speakers are kind of key. If you're connected to a practitioner who can share their lived experience and even help you get into a job, that's number 1. So you're in the right room to connect with the right people. The second thing is that you can't actually learn if you don't actually practice. So you need to actually do the work, right? The easiest way to learn GHG accounting, not the easiest, the best way is to build a scope 1, 2, 3. I know that Change Climate has a volunteer, but you can also, apply this to your own organization. If you get the right guidance, you can start today. Curriculum learning is key to get the latest, which we generally provide, and you can find these on many other areas and many other forums. And also having the professional community. And I think that's kind of the important thing. And so what we saw just over some upskill training, once you do that, this is where we see change. From 500 people that we surveyed across 40 countries, when you do get some upskill green skills like today, just a tiny bit, you can move from no prior knowledge to confident to advise. And that is key. Like if you get into a job scenario and someone asks, have you done this before? Being able to say, yes, I've done it before and show your work, or I'm familiar with it, is the reason why people would get jobs. And so we've seen that small change in a micro credential, or for you to get those skill sets and actually model things, turn into, I got the job. And that's part of the problem. If you don't have access, you won't get it. And that's what we're here for with having our credentials. And so on that front, if you are interested to invest more into your skill sets, you can either reach out to me through LinkedIn, but we have like a special time for any strong applicants that we get. We're more than happy to bring you through on our early bird, which starts in July, and really exciting for you to be able to join our continued building network. And so that is our commitment to fill the green skills gap, because we need to put a middle finger, sorry for my French, but to the sustainability consulting sector that is hiding a lot of the secret sauce. We need to make it not secret sauce. Otherwise, we're going to spend the next 6 years still arguing about how measurement happens, and the world is going to burn. So we need to make this stuff as accessible as possible. And so therefore, we've given over $250,000 in terms of scholarships, mainly to the Global South, people without jobs. But you are still here and we care for you. And that's why we organize events like this. And with that, we hope to fill the gap by training and activating 100,000 sustainability professionals, which we committed to last year as our mission first thing. And we hope that you join our mission of 100K. Great. So I'm going to stop sharing and we should get into some live questions. So with my panelists here, as we bring them up on stage, I think they need to get spotlighted. I will start with asking the first question. So with the 3 people that we have here, and you can popcorn it across, what motivated you to pursue a career in GHG accounting and sustainability management? So Madeline, would you like to start and we can pass it around?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Magdalene. I think I knew from an early age, I was always really passionate about kind of the food environmental intersection. I grew up in a family of farmers, and I did quite famously start a rather aggressive recycling program at the age of 8 years old. But even then, I think it took a while to find my right spot. And so I came from the science side, so I studied chemistry, and loved it. I think it's a great toolbox. Um, I worked in a lot of jobs that I think are adjacent to climate change or really gave me good skills for it. But I still kind of wanted to do more, and so I ended up kind of reaching out while doing my master's. I felt like I was learning a lot of great theoretical knowledge, but I really wanted to apply it. And so I reached out to the Food and Agriculture Organization, and ended up working there for 3 years, which I loved, and slowly started on a less greenhouse gas emission specific project, but kind of expressed my interest and was able to segue over into a more specific greenhouse gas emissions and carbon accounting assignment. And I've really loved it. It's really dynamic. I think there's so many exciting things about this field as well as challenging. Yeah, so.
Amazing. And Sarah?
Thanks. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sarah Shoemaker. I think I found my way into a carbon accounting role. I don't think there was any specific point where I was like, yes, I want to do greenhouse gas accounting. But certainly have always been drawn to purpose-driven work. For a long time, I thought I wanted to be a doctor and got to college and was in biology and chemistry and really was turned off by that. But found my way into the environmental studies program at UC Santa Barbara and really just found my stride and graduated with a degree in environmental studies from there. And yeah, after graduating was really motivated to get into a sustainability focused role, but didn't quite find my niche or role that I felt qualified for. In kind of my small town of Santa Barbara, where I live now, just didn't quite find the right opportunity with a sustainability role at the time. So I ended up working for a consumer brand. Had a really great experience there working in customer support, which was kind of really great client-facing experience, but also kind of still like kept my passion and interest in sustainability and leading initiatives within that company, kind of just on the side and at need, and was able to work on some kind of research projects around material sourcing and selecting packaging and work with product team there to make some changes to implement better material purchases. And then also had the opportunity to lead on our climate neutral certification at the time, which entailed completing a greenhouse gas inventory, setting reduction plans based on those emissions. So that was really my first like practical experience or application doing greenhouse gas management. And that really led me to the Climate Neutral team, which is now the Change Climate Project, and found my place here and have now worked with hundreds of companies on their greenhouse gas inventories. Yeah, and just really kind of love the data aspect of it. Really love the purpose-driven work aspect of it. And yeah, kind of just found my way here, I think, really by leading with my interests and passions, and somehow it worked out.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. And Christina.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Christina, and similar to Magdalene, sustainability was also a focus for me even as a kid. I knew I wanted to work in an environmental business space before I got to college, and so I got a degree in environmental studies in undergrad. And coming out of school, I was filled with really grand like environmental theories and concepts of sustainable business models. And was really excited to make like big positive change at the first company, a little startup company that I worked for in my first job out of college. My boss, however, was from an investment banking background and didn't really believe in doing sustainability initiatives without a clear business motivation. And so one day my boss asked me if I could figure out how to calculate the emissions that we were saving from our like kind of unique business model, so that we could present this to investors who were increasingly asking for this to help like our startup raise more funds. And so I felt like, oh, this is finally my time to shine. We're actually going to be able to work on sustainability initiatives here. But I realized that I hadn't actually learned how to do greenhouse gas accounting in my undergrad program. And so I didn't have that like technical skill set, which I think is a problem for many people here. And so I realized, for better or for worse, these numbers are something that like most businesses need. And so I went off to find a way to learn like the technical skills required for companies to make those measurements and like baselines that they need to have a business case for making reductions. So that was like what spurred me to move into the greenhouse gas accounting field. And so my path was to go back to grad school to get that knowledge, but I've since learned there are many other paths that might have been quicker and more affordable. And so, yeah, happy to continue this discussion.
Yeah. Well, thank you. These three are the most badass people that I know in the field right now in this space. So I'd really encourage you and just to listen to their story, because they're all topsy-turvy, right? There is no one pathway to this. The same thing with me. Actually, how I learned GHG accounting was actually doing a model, even though I didn't know what I was doing, which is bad, but it's a lot of what's actually done. And so this is a good segue to the fact that honestly, to learn GHG accounting carbon, I'm bullish on the fact that it's actually doing a project on it, whether it's volunteer or just in a safe environment or sometimes in consulting on your first project. So with that, I'd love to frame a question to get the real stories from you. Can you share a significant project or initiative that you've worked on related to carbon accounting, and what were some of the challenges, best practices or principles that you learned doing the process? And we can start with whomever, and you can popcorn it around. So whoever wants to go first.
I can jump in. Yeah, I think mine's maybe not one specific project, but something I think is a common theme that I've encountered working with businesses as they're really, especially ones that are starting out for the first time in carbon accounting. A big like learning curve is really the data collection piece. And part of my role on this side of things is helping to guide those businesses through that data collection process, understanding really like what the greenhouse gas protocol, how they bucket emissions, and understanding what's relevant and like, yeah, where to put things in the right place. So I think that's kind of a two-way learning street, and in working with lots of businesses is like asking the right questions to understand different business models, understand what source of emissions you should be expecting from a completed greenhouse gas inventory, and understanding what the greenhouse gas protocol guidance is for calculating emissions and bucketing those emission sources. And yeah, being able to like have those conversations with the company, ask them hard questions, push them to collect relevant and really like the best data that they can. Data collection is really hard. It can be hard to engage with stakeholders in your value chain for businesses that maybe don't have super great transparency into the utilities that their suppliers are using. That takes time and conversations to be able to do that. And it's kind of, I think, our role on the side of greenhouse gas management experts, I'll say, is to really guide companies through those best practices so that they're conservatively measuring their emissions, that they're modeling their emissions in the right way, so that they can really get to the most important part, which is reducing those emissions.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. And one thing I'll just note, I didn't get to go into how GHG is actually calculated. So just one step back, the math is simple. It's literally simple multiplication. The problem is that you need to collect company activity data, ideally, or just data from a company, and it can come in financials, activity data, or direct measurement or surveys. And then you multiply them by what we call emission factors. And these emission factors are applied to whatever company data you have. So for example, I don't know, for $10 spent on a meal, this is a really bad example, $10 spent on a meal, you multiply it by emission factor of how much a meal is emissions. Or ideally, you kind of know specifically activity-wise that it's a meat-based or plant-based, then you have like a multiplier that gives you a CO2 equivalent, which is then what goes into the account. So I just want to make sure, and that's why framing it with what Sarah says, data collection is the issue, because company data wasn't set up in a way for us to measure emissions, and sometimes it's hard to get the information that you need. And so that's great. So with that context, maybe Christina, you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. I think across all projects, data collection tends to be the biggest challenge. So I will talk about a different challenge that I've been seeing right now, that I think is very interesting, is like companies finding a balance between accuracy of their greenhouse gas footprint and action. And so across like several clients that I'm working with right now, they're trying to get more accurate emissions factors data sets that Neil was just talking about, that are specific to their supply chain. And right now, like basically right now, companies are using generic data sets that are out in the world. Some of them are free, some are paid, some are provided by the government. There's lots of data out there. But these companies are like trying to get more specific to see how like the emissions from their specific farms or like factories are. And so I think this is very cool. It's a way to start seeing how like if you are doing new farming methods on a specific farm, you'll be able to see emissions reductions more clearly than when you're using the generic emissions factors. But so I think the challenge that I'm seeing here though is companies are waiting to set up those like more advanced emission factors in some cases. And I think like so that they can get credit for emissions reductions, when right now with the emissions factors we do have, like we can start taking action, like directionally we know which way we should be going. And so that's like one challenge that I've been seeing within companies is like balancing like wanting to get credit and accuracy versus actually just starting and like getting moving. I think I like this one analogy I saw in an article that if we're driving all in a car at high speed towards a cliff, we should be trying to turn around rather than trying to find out if we're going 100 miles per hour or 90 miles per hour. And so that's a big challenge that I've been seeing lately. So that will be my answer.
Christina, that was a tweetable quote, by the way, that you just said. I think that's a great
borrowed
one.
it from someone else. So yeah.
Magdalene, I can see you nodding your head a lot, but what would you like to add in your projects?
Well, I was going to talk a little bit about communicating uncertainty because, and I think this is such a great link, Katrina. A lot of, well, since I work in the public sector, and so my clients are generally countries or parts of the governments, but still works pretty much the same. But a lot of what I found in our projects, because mostly in my role, I go in and we look at a specific farm and we're trying to give them better management. And then we're trying to bring that to the landscape level. But I think one of the hardest things is communicating the assumptions and the uncertainties in these models in a way that encourages people to still engage with them, but make sure you're actually communicating kind of what the challenges are and where we still need further research and further progress. So balancing the two of you have to meet the solutions where you are right now, but still continuing to invest in improving them in the right ways. And communicating where you're at so that nobody feels like, so that trust is retained. I think that's so important, and really challenging. It's definitely part of every project I have that I think is always a growing process. So
Yeah. Man, the three of you literally touched on the three ingredients to GHG accounting. So using a recipe book outside of the foundational knowledge of reading the GHG protocol, which there's no shortcut. Please read it. If you are interested in carbon accounting, read it, read it, read it, read it. That's one. Or the second part is look at a report afterwards and learn it backwards, right? But there are three components they literally taught. So if I'm summarizing this, is number one, company data needs to be key. We need to collect data and information because GHG protocol is at the enterprise organizational level, right? That's one. Two, it's the emission factors that you use. And there are existing ones, there are free ones, there are paid ones, but there are also new ones that are all coming up or trying to get a bit more granular, but we can't just rely on that, as Christina said. And then third of all, we need to translate this. And this is the problem. You are not alone when you are sort of saying you're not very familiar with this. There's one slide I didn't show you that the majority of CSOs right now are internally recruited. 2/3 of them are internally hired, and less than half of them have sustainability backgrounds. So you're talking about the person leading this is still learning the accounting. And even worse, they're at a C-suite level or an executive level, and they don't have time to read the new standards that are coming up. So they're really relying on talent like the ones here on the panel, but even junior analysts to translate these hundreds of pages of documents. So inherently, that is the kind of ingredients if you actually want to be a GHG accounting, foundational knowledge, understanding how data is collected from the company, multiplying it and understanding where the emissions are, and then translating that information, which it's tough. We generally have like a written report, sometimes a visual report, sometimes it's a software data. It's like hard to sort of, depending on who you have. Great. Amazing. So my third question before we maybe hop into Q&A from the group to make this more interactive is, well, what advice would you give to someone looking to start their career in GHG accounting and sustainability management, even pulling from what you did yourself, whether it's tactical advice or strategic advice that people can follow? So whomever wants to jump in.
I can start. I would suggest reaching out to people. I think this is a really friendly network. I also think from my own experience, there are so many ways you can approach this, and it's going to be in a time investment however you transition. So it's good from the start of the process to start reaching out to people and figuring out exactly what they do so that you know what's actually going to be the right fit for you. And then I think I would definitely encourage people, if you're like me and you're coming from a really technical background, I think there's a lot. The more soft skills you invest in, the better. That's part of why I did partake in the OPF Academy. And that was great for me because it really gave me more perspectives from different backgrounds. And that's really strengthened my ability to kind of respond to different solutions and has been really valuable. So I would definitely invest in that.
I can go next. Yeah, I think for me, like start with the low-hanging fruit, which I think can be a variety of things as we've mentioned. I would say from my personal experience, you don't need an MBA to be able to do carbon accounting. So if this is a space you're interested in, like it really just takes going out to find the resources and skills and trainings that you need to up-level your understanding and skills in this. whether it's OPF Academy or reading Greenhouse Gas Protocol or volunteering with the Change Climate Project in one of our volunteer programs. I think there's a lot of ways to do that. If you're working for a company where you have some ability to express interest in this, or lead a project, whether it's like reducing waste at the office or learning how to use a carbon accounting tool, there are hundreds at this point on the market, and not all of them are, high cost software platforms. There's lots available that are kind of a bit more entry level that have estimation features. One of those Neil kindly mentioned, the Business Emissions Evaluator, the Change Climate Project, which we fondly refer to as the B. You can create an estimate for a business in 15 to 30 minutes. So if that's your starting point, then start there and start building up. Engage your leadership or other teammates that you might be working with that want to be working on this stuff and kind of engage in that. Get stakeholder buy-in. As Neil mentioned, if you're interested in learning how to do a carbon inventory, just try and do it on your own. I don't know. See how far you get and what you can do with that. And if you have an inventory to start with and you can bring that to a leadership team and say, look, this is where we stand, like, what are we going to do about our emissions? Then it's worth a try, and that might lead to something next and kind of further your own career investment, your own knowledge and learning. So I think just kind of exploring all those options out there. But yeah, I would say, as Magdalene said, it's going to be a time investment, but if it's something you're passionate about, then it'll be worth it.
Wow, couldn't have said it better. We actually have our associates right now practicing doing our Scope 1, 2, 3 for 2023, and then we're helping to guide them. So maybe we need more companies to donate and say, hey, we'd love to get that. I think the Change Climate Project has that. Obviously, there's more people interested than the suppliers. That's the issue, is that we need more companies to be aware of this. And so my advice is probably more tactical, which I remember sitting at a Yale lecture, and this was me, also similar program to Christina, where someone came in and talked about GHG accounting, and I was just like, man, I really don't know this stuff. But it took me to basically look up online and spend a day or two and just start to read it. And then it started to make sense. So my advice is there's no shortcut, no TikTok video that can just eliminate the fact that our field just needs to be read, and reading is really important. And then from there, if you're really serious, reach out to people. Obviously, some people might be busy to be able to meet straight away, but they can help guide you in the right direction. Like, where is the next step? That's always what I like. I just basically looked at this. What's the next step I should look at and connect with people? And if I'm able to get a coffee chat after I talk through them with an actual ask, I say, well, based on what I have, do you know anyone else I should connect with? And as long as you're showing up as a climate curious individual and you have done your reading and you are serious about this space, unless you're going to embarrass that person, more than likely they will be connecting you with some resource or some person, I would sort of say. So since we have a tiny bit more time, it'd be silly of me not to cover this. So software versus services, right? So if people haven't been in this field, you've seen 1,000 different GHG accounting software platforms that have come up for better or for worse. But we also have a bunch of professionals that do this manually. And I would say straight up the cuff, as a professional, we toggle between using some software and using Excel. There's probably never a case where we're purely using one or the other though. So since we have someone that works with the platform, Sarah, and we have professionals who probably work with both, maybe we can touch on that. So what is your thought on the role of emerging technologies playing in the future of carbon accounting and sustainability management, and or the role of professionals who need to do the work? So perhaps we start with Sarah.
Yeah, I think, as Neil mentioned, I pretty much solely, for the most part, work with software. That's where I've come in to learn carbon accounting, is pretty much through software. We do a lot of the data is still hosted in Google Sheets and it's synced to our software. But I think this emerging technologies and lower cost software available on the market really lowers the barrier to entry. If you can learn a software solution and understand the background math that's going on behind it too, then you have the tools to be able to do greenhouse gas accounting. As long as you can kind of touch on those other three pieces of the recipe, which is data collection and communicating kind of the outputs of those models as well. Yeah, I think it's kind of makes greenhouse gas accounting more accessible, makes greenhouse gas management more accessible, and is going to further what we can do from here.
Any additions, Christina?
Yeah, I was going to say that I came into the greenhouse gas accounting space from the other side where I learned how to do the accounting purely in Excel models when I was first starting, and am now like starting to learn more of the softwares that are out there. And so I do think it is beneficial to know like how the calculation is happening behind the scenes. I think that just really helps you think about and again, as Neil said, it's a pretty simple calculation once you know what's happening. And so I think that is a good place to start, and it is something you can do just at home. Like you could start a model for like a small business and just practice and just like start plugging in numbers. You can also do that with software, or even do it both ways and see if you like get different results. And so, but ultimately, I do think that like the emerging technologies, AI, is going to be huge in this space, in that they're going to be able to, yeah, just like speed up the process. Right now, sometimes it can take like 4 to even 6 months to do a company's footprint, if it's like a big company, so which only leaves like half a year at best to take actions on these results. And so I think by speeding up the process with software and stuff, it will allow consultants like me to focus more on action and like how are we going to implement changes that actually create positive impacts rather than doing just an exercise in accounting. So I think softwares are helpful. I think they're gonna, yeah, help make change, positive change. So
Yeah, I think the emergent technology side is really exciting to me. For agriculture, there's a lot of different softwares, and I tend to use a fusion of several different approaches in my different projects. But especially things like remote sensing, when you're looking at trying to get more specific information. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening with AI, with remote sensing for greenhouse gas measurement and validation of all of the models. So I think that's combination of, I guess, all three is really what I would say is it's going towards. But
yeah. And my quick 2 cents is bad data in is bad data out. And that inherently is the challenge, right? And standards are shifting and changing. So the tools that can keep up with the latest is key. And software does do a lot of help to categorize emission factors that can take a hell of a lot of time, right? But it still requires someone with a fundamental knowledge of GHG accounting. It's like you can't have the software be a silver bullet without understanding that. And I think Sarah and her team have done a great job in trying to make their tool more accessible. But the final thing I'd sort of say, just as QuickBooks didn't get rid of financial accounting, right? Software will not get rid of GHG accountants. It's just that we'll be working on the harder parts in the future. Christine, I saw you just went on mute. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
I was gonna say the same thing about data in equals data out, because we've definitely had instances of putting client data into a software and maybe they tracked units wrong or something, and so the end result was something crazy that the software didn't necessarily catch.
Yeah.
But looking at it as a human, you can be like, oh, that doesn't make sense, and dive in. And so right now, I think that's kind of where we're at, especially is like, okay, a human does need to like look critically at these things. And in the future, there'll probably be more fail safes that help prevent those types of issues too. So
yeah. And I smile because for my US counterparts, please learn the metric system. I've seen conversion issues between imperial and metric. It is an easier system. Trust me, I'm a Commonwealth. It makes a lot of sense. 1,000 to 1, basically, not some crazy thing I don't understand. Great. Well, let's jump into the most voted questions we have here. Don't feel free if you don't want to answer. Everyone doesn't have to answer all of it, but where are the best places to find practice data sets for GHG accounting portfolio projects?
I'd say maybe the US EPA, or if you're in a different country, you can see if your specific country, EU, has data sets that you can use that are free. I'm trying to think. There's other free data sets, but I like would skew towards government ones. I don't know if y'all have different answer.
All right. Well, we use one password to share an account for Eco Invent, but I don't know if that's a good. But yeah, there are ones where getting access, you could probably find peer-reviewed review articles. Actually, that's the way I would go somewhat, that you can actually, depending on your industry, probably Google a lot and find that either someone's written a science paper on it or there's a report already existing to provide proxies so that they have it in their appendix.
If you want to go agriculture specific, the Food and Agriculture Organization does have several data sets available. But again, that's a pretty specific industry. So EPA has a better all around.
Awesome. Great. Well, the next question is, what's the most common mistake you see in GHG accounting models? I think we covered a couple, but is there anything else you see issue-wise?
Yeah, I would say units is a big one that I've seen a lot. And then I guess not necessarily data related, but within the data collection phase, we'll be working with like one stakeholder and who's like maybe helping us collect data within their company. And then when we like present final results, we say, oh, okay, we weren't able to find that data, so we ended up using a proxy or like an estimate there. And someone in the presentation is like, oh, we do have that data. Like, why didn't you talk to us about it? And so I think making sure you've like engaged all stakeholders, that happens all the time, like where you like the client themselves didn't know where to find the data. And so we thought it didn't exist. And then when you bring in like more stakeholders, suddenly it's like, oh yeah, we had that sitting in this corner of our company. So that, I don't know if that's just like an advice, is to like maybe double click on people to see if like, are you sure you don't have this piece of data so for your final results.
I think the one that I run into, which is maybe a bit different, the tools that we use are a bit more self-guided, where our team at the Change Climate Project is not performing or completing inventories on behalf of companies, but actually guiding them through that measurement process. So often there are questions around what emission factor should I apply, like the emission factor libraries, depending on where you source from, they're long, but as Christina mentioned, they're also broad. So there's not always a niche kind of perfect one-to-one match for someone's supply chain, ingredient way over here. And they have to use something that's just the best match from the library that we do source from. So I think often being able to guide companies the right way there, being able to on a company side, somewhat do your own research if you are doing greenhouse gas accounting kind of in more self-guided way, to find the most relevant emission factors to apply, and understand that it is modeling and it's not going to be a perfect match unless you're doing a custom LCA, which takes a lot more time.
And my biggest thing is that people, again, haven't read this. And if you are serious, it's just reading. There's a lot of synopsises of it. One example I'd say is that I actually know the person who's working on the Scope 3 updates at WRI, and he received over tens of thousands of submissions from private companies. He actually told me, in reality, more than half of them wrote things that were incorrect, that were misinformed. And in some senses, it just shows, one, that there still are people who are leading this and making public comments that don't fully understand, I haven't read this. Or second of all, it shows, the fact that we still need a ways to go for changing standards. So with that, there's one question here. Which standards are you seeing most used globally? And is there clear and agreed upon definition of net zero? I mean, I mentioned the GHG protocol, and I say, yes, there is a definition of net zero, which is reducing emissions by 45% from pre-industrial times by 2030 and getting to net zero at 2050, which is your residual emissions, which is key, not any emissions that you then get rid of, which residual is the stuff that you can't get rid of. The problem with net zero is that people are just offsetting or buying credits based on business as usual and not reducing enough. I don't know if there's anything else to touch on the,
Yeah, I think my team at Lightspeed definitely reference Science-Based Targets Initiative often in terms of guidance there on net zero target. And a big part of our current certification standard at the Change Climate Project for climate neutral certification is purchasing offset to compensate for your full inventory. However, we don't count offsets towards a net zero claim. Net zero is still, we at least defer to or reference your emissions totals. And that's why part of our standard is setting those reduction plans to actually reduce absolute emissions.
Anything else, Madeline, Christina? I mean, there is CDP as well, and then the ISO net zero standard, but SBTi has definitely been leading the charge for submitting net zero, and GHG protocol is what you use to do carbon accounting, is probably my best bet, unless you're a publicly traded company looking at CDP or you're waiting for ISO net zero standards that won't come until next year.
Yeah, I think that's what we see with most of our clients is using GHG protocol and yeah, Science-Based Targets Initiative. And then I guess within that, like following regulations that are coming out through in the EU and the US is like kind of important to see what standards like they're asking you to follow and just like keeping apprised of those and making sure you're able to follow them if they have any changes. But they're generally kind of moving towards GHG protocols being like the standard approach.
Yeah, great. I see a question here about how much these positions pay, but I'm not going to put these poor folk on the page about what they get paid. My suggestion is just go and Google these job descriptions. You'll get a very quick sense of like what the pay bands are for this, but I would sort of say it sits within similar like sustainability consulting or professional pay. I don't think there's any difference in the GHG accounting side, in my opinion. And normally these roles are roped into not just GHG accounting. Very rare to have just a job that is GHG accounting, but more than likely a sustainability professional, which is a bit more of a broader bucket, but it really ranges depending on the size of company that you work for. So I would just sort of suggest that there's no quicker way but to look up. Even for example, Qantas has a bunch. Obviously, Ceres is a non-profit versus a for-profit search enterprise versus the UN versus a private boutique versus a big company. It will probably range depending on the size of the project and the work that they do. And maybe one more question that we have here is, what suggestions do you have for professionals with a few years of practical experience who are looking to transition into carbon accounting? And we kind of had something similar, but I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, particularly, I guess, with people with experience.
Experience in carbon accounting already, or
just a few years of practical experience?
Oh, okay. I feel like it would be similar in like finding ways to actually practice your greenhouse gas accounting, either using a tool or like by building a model in Excel and like just asking, yeah, a local business if they would let you kind of practice with them. That way you have something to like show, like something tangible that you can be like, I've done this before. And I'm like passionate enough about it to have like done this on my own and like learn those skills. I don't know if that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think I would second that. I don't know if I have anything to add there.
Magdalene, anything else to add? Otherwise,
I think that pretty much sums it up. I mean, I had the option within my organization to ask to be put on a project where I could really demonstrate with the exclusively greenhouse gas emission section that I would be an asset to them and that I could show the skills that way. So if you have the opportunity to do that, reach out. It can't hurt if you ask in a polite and like show it that you're willing to try and contribute your time on top of your other work. It could help. But yeah.
Yeah. And I'll just sort of shout out the fact that with Change Climate Project, they've been kind enough as a nonprofit to give us 150 educational licenses that we use in our academy to train people, one, on a software platform. And we also provide the Excel format because I think both are kind of important, but we want to try to obviously move to like smarter ways to do it. And so my thing is, at least, is if you don't feel like you can get access, that's literally what we do. And so as I bring, which is what we do in the academy in our lab, you actually have to build an accounting model, both on Change Climate Project, and you can also have the Excel format. Because once you get to the interviews, like, have you done this before, you can show it. And it's a safe environment to do so if you can't get that. So with that, just to sort of bring things home, again, if you want to check it out and it's interesting to you, I'm happy to answer any questions. Denise is too. We want to make this super accessible for work on climate folk. And if you're in the global south or not with a job, like, we got you. We want to make sure that this is super accessible. But if you are wanting to invest in your skill sets, otherwise, sign up to our newsletter or follow the people here because we share a lot of content online. And hopefully we can fill the jobs and skills gap together because there's a lot of jobs out there. So please, like, join us in the climate movement. This work needs all of you, and your work really matters. Great. So with that, I'll pass it back to Valerie to take us home.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you to all of our panelists, Magdalene, Sarah, Christina, and Neil. Also our volunteers and the team at 1PointFive for a really insightful session. And thank you to our audience for joining and participating and caring about the climate. And we'll be sending a post-event email with links to some key resources shared during this event. So you'll be able to have everything if you weren't able to take notes. Finally, Climate Career Week is not over. There's some really great sessions. Please check them out on the Climate Career Week website. And please take a few moments before you go to give us some live feedback. It really helps us improve our events so we can support the wider community. You can just scan using the QR code on the screen or follow the link that we're going to put in the chat. Again, thanks, everybody. That was a great session.
Yeah, please leave us some feedback or shout outs. I think everyone's been so generous with their time. Sustainability professionals, we're just really collaborative and we're here to help. So just please, either in the chat, just say thank you to our speakers and Valerie and the team who've put so much work to put this on for everyone. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
And it's great to see David here too. David's a champion. You should check out David Javer and his work as well. And he trains GHG accounting through Terra. Absolutely phenomenal individual. And it's great to see you here, David. Thanks a lot, Sarah, Christina, Magdalene. Really appreciate your taking your time out. Hopefully it wasn't too crazy, but I think it was really valuable stuff. Really, really valuable.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Yeah, and thanks for moderating.
No worries. I love this stuff. Alrighty, thanks a lot, Denise. Feel free to pop out, folks, once you filled out the survey, but I'm happy we finished on time. Funny story, this is the one song that I use for all my teaching, and people think I have a great playlist, but it's literally one song on SoundCloud.
It's a hit.
It's a great song.
Yeah, it's got a good vibe to it, but I'm just brainwashing people to I've had even Matthias, who's my founding partner, start to hum this beat afterwards. I'm like, yes, exactly. Every time you hear this, you think climate. Denise is probably really sick of this song and wants to throw her computer across because she hears it all the time.
I would walk down the aisle to the song, Neil.
Oh no, Denise, don't say that. Oh my word. All right, folks, I think we should be good.
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna
think